Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. My very special guest is Bob Wolfgramm, Dr. Robert Wolfgramm Sr. And Bob, whenever I have you on the show, I'm always a bit starstruck. I'll try not to gush, but you had such an influence on me when I was a young man. You, Lol Tarling, Genelevich, Sally Hilda, your album, All My Friends Are Sinners, just blew me out of the water. And I later researched that in the last couple of years, and that album actually sold hugely well in the Christian music scene, not just to Adventists. Um, so yeah, I won't gush, but I just want everyone to know because we've got so many more new members now since our last interview, even, and I just want people to know that I come to this conversation with a huge amount of respect, and you really offered myself and a lot of young people in the Adventist Church so much hope and light, and in some ways you transformed the Des Ford message into song. Which is a bit of an irony because he wasn't really up to date with any kind of secular music, and he knew nothing of what was going on in the hippie music scene. Um, so yeah, I know you really enjoyed his gospel message of assurance of salvation, and you conveyed that in your music, and it really gave a lot of us hope. So I'm really looking forward to our chat today. And welcome everybody that's watching. Just a quick little bit of housekeeping while we've got a bunch of people here. I'll bring it up onto the screen. I have started a new channel. It's called SDA&A Highlights, and it's for those of you that have an attention span that just can't quite cope with the long form. So I'll be putting lots and lots of edited shows there, all around the 20-minute long-ish. So I'm randomly picking videos at the moment and interviews at the moment, but gradually we'll come up to speed, and each week there'll be a version of the long form at SDA Q&A, and a version of a short form over at SDA Q&A Highlights. Now, whenever I promote that in Facebook and YouTube and Google don't like each other, so no, the link is seen by like 3 people. So I'm just telling you verbally, go to YouTube and look SDA Q&A Highlights, and you will see the channel. There's already 4 videos there, and it's already started to take off. So look forward to you guys going over there and getting a bit of traction by signing up, subscribing, clicking like, etc. And as I said, my guest today is Dr. Robert Wolfgramm Sr. And I'm going to get him to, he can't see anybody. He's just looking at his screen, unfortunately. And I've called today's talk A Revisionist's Lament. That's my title in that I wanted to stir some conversation because we had a fantastic chat last time, Bob, where we talked about the different groups of Adventism, and it was so helpful because you kind of helped me define the progressive liberal Adventist as being perhaps more in the revisionist camp, and you shared your the rebel and what was your other one? What did you call your pioneer Adventists? What was that?
They were traditionalists.
The traditionalists, yeah.
Yes.
And I kind of have come away from that with a bit of a what do you call this? Charts that cross over and have the subset in the middle.
Venn diagram.
A Venn diagram. And one side is the traditional Adventist, the pioneer Adventist that you spoke of. And the other side is the revisionists and the progressive liberals, the group that doesn't want to be defined, but they're in there somewhere. And in the subset, I see cultural Adventists from both sides. They're just happy to go to church. They love the warmth of it. They see a lot of value in Ellen. They don't want to necessarily go deeper into a lot of stuff, but they draw comfort from her writings, etc. And then overseeing that Venn diagram is the administration. They're almost a breed unto themselves. They have this way of trying to control both sides and keep it all together. And they even have their own real history and, family connections and all sorts of stuff. So just for those watching, that's my way of trying to approach how I see Adventists, a former Adventist myself looking in from the outside, is this two main big groups that subset around a cultural kind of connection. And there's an admin kind of component overlooking as well. And one thing I've noticed, Bob, in doing these interviews, is the pushback I've gotten as I've kind of, shine a bit of an interrogating light on these gospel Adventists, revisionists, academics, scholars. They don't like me challenging their kind of, and all I'm doing is trying to find out, is ask some questions.
Sure.
And I think they interpret my challenging as challenging their identity, whereas I'm really just trying to make sense of it all. And one thing that has hit me, as I was about to say, of all these interviews, there doesn't appear to be a lot of introspection from the revisionist crowd, the academics, the scholars. They're great at analyzing, sociologically speaking, historically speaking. People like Gil Valentine, Don McAdams, Warren Trenchard, Denny 14, Ron Graybill, George Knight. They're brilliant at saying, here's the data. But very few go back to this big time of, and we're not talking about Glacier View and Desford today, we'll touch on it, but they go back to that time of great turmoil, and they don't ask the question, how could we have done better? So my generation comes into this, we notice that, lucky we had you and your albums, because we had some sense of a cultural identity with Adventism through the music and the gospel, because all the young ministers were leaving in droves. So we had no connection. And then later on in the 80s, a lot of you guys that were involved may have left or who stayed, started to become quite influential on our kind of generation. So what happened then is through the 90s and the 2000s, we got a lot of hope, and things are changing and we're revising. The revisionists were giving my generation and younger a lot of hope. But what we saw post Jan Paulson, a lot of those hopes dashed with political endeavors, a lot of a return to the pioneer traditional kind of Adventism, overseen by Ted Wilson and his kind of political desire to bring the church back into line. He would see it as being. And so, just being honest, my generation and younger, and we're all old now, we're just below the baby boomers, but we felt like, okay, you guys, can we discuss what you think went wrong so we can do better? So when I ask some of the hard questions, I'm not criticizing the revisionists, the scholars, or the academics. These guys really shone a light onto my path, and I love them dearly. But I feel like they're still being a bit wishy-washy. Before we kick into our interview proper, and I'm going to do a full interview on this down the track, I wonder if you can hear a bit of a conclusion that Dr. Don McAdams made in a recent Adventist Today Sabbath School session. It's a brilliant session. I invite people to go and check the whole thing out. He kind of summarized, he and these other academics and scholars who have put out a book called Reclaiming the Prophet. And he says in a couple of sentences, that's only a 1 minute long video, where these academics and scholars perhaps feel things could go. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And then I want to really dig into the PowerPoint you've got today and look again at this topic. Is that fine to do that?
Yes, that's good, Peter. With the PowerPoint I'm doing today is just to show you the historical roots of revisionism in our
I love that. I'm very keen to hear that because
Okay, well,
because
and
it ties exactly into what I've been thinking lately and what I'm saying today is I
yeah,
want to know where the roots are of these revisionist guys
okay,
and how can I even help in a tiny way to help. It feels like in some ways this book they've just written as a compilation, Reclaiming the Prophet, is I've been cajoling for a couple of years now. What are you doing? You're all just talking in your little quiet Sabbath schools. It feels like they're actually doing a bit of a call to action. So I'm interested in your thoughts of what I've just said,
yep,
my summary, how accurate it is, and then also this concept that, and I don't place you in this because I'm a musician and music spoke to me. There is no way it was ever offering me false hope. It was shining a light onto my path that sustains me to this day. But when
thank you,
I
Peter.
look at a lot of the scholars and academic works, they revealed to me theological, political, they took the scales from my eyes about a lot of Ellen White stuff and left me raw and challenged and wondering what to do. And then they did nothing with it because a historian just says, here's the facts. You read a Gil Valentine book and they're just gold. But you come to the end of it and go, now what? You've just revealed these facts. And so I feel like if because of the nature of Adventism, these kind of scholars and academics, they need to step up to the plate. And what we're doing today is looking back at the roots of revisionists. And I'm hoping that we can come to some kind of conclusion as to, hey, good on them for what they're doing. At least they're speaking up now, offering some kind of a way forward, really. I'm all about finding a way forward.
Okay,
Not attacking, not deconstructing. What's the way forward? And that can be a bit messy. That can be a bit uncomfortable. And so, yeah. So we'll play this short clip,
sure.
and then we'll get your thoughts, and then we'll dive into the PowerPoint. And where is it? Here we go. It's mainly just.
This book is a collection of articles, and it's all, with a few exceptions, like me, it's Ellen White scholars. And here are the authors: Terry Amont, Eric Anderson, Niels Erik Andreasen, John Butler, Dennis Fortin, Lawrence Garrity, Ronald Graybill, George Knight, me, Don McAdams, Paul McGraw, and Gil Valentine. Now, the premise of this book is something new and fresh. And I'm going to conclude on this. And I recommend you should buy this book. It's not expensive, it's online, and it's short. You can read it, in an afternoon. The premise of this book is that the scholarship of the revisionist historians is settled. We don't want to dispute it. We don't want to argue about it. We don't want to deny it. We accept it. We accept it. But what do we do with it? What do we do with it? What is the value of Ellen White to us today? How is she relevant for the church? And the answer is the Lord used her in ways that we may not be able to explain, but he did use her. We believe that because of the power of the books themselves. Not only was she a historical force of great significance, we wouldn't have a church without her. Her writings point us to the Bible. They point us to the cross. They uplift our spirits. They bring comfort to us in times of sorrow, and the value for Ellen White to the church is not. And here's a quotation that comes from one of the Bible Conference 1919 Bible Conference leaders, and I want to find this and read it to you. This is H. Camden Lacey, who was one of the participants in the 1919 Bible Conference. And he says, quote, "In our estimate of the spirit of prophecy, isn't its value to us more in the spiritual light it throws into our own hearts and lives than in the intellectual accuracy in historical and theological matters? And I think we know what the answer to that is. Yes. Okay, I'm open for questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so fascinating. And this is how I feel. They've made a start. I think it's a weak start, but at least it's a start. Over to you, Rob. What do you think of all of that I've just
I
said?
just thought, well, thank you for playing me that. I don't get a lot of time to tune into your guests, Peter, but thank you for that. I think they've got a long way to go. We, if I speak as as an Hellenist, as you called me in the church, we have a long way to go to produce a version of Ellen White to those of our fellow Christians, which does justice to the revisionism that has, I think, helped clear up the myths. And I'll have to get hold of that book, Peter, and have a good read of it.
Yeah.
It's just out, is it?
It's literally just out, and it's available at Adventist book centres.
I see. So who's published it?
Online. So it's published by Pacific Press. Let me just, I had the information right at my hand.
Okay.
Pacific Press. So it's an official publication. It's called Reclaiming the Prophet, An Honest Defense of Ellen White's Gift. And there's basically essays, Terry Dopp, Amott, Eric Anderson, Niels Erik Andreessen, Jonathan Butler, Dennis 14, Larry Geraghty, Ronald Grable, George Knight, Don McAdams, Paul E. McGrew, George Valentine, Gilbert Valentine, I think. Yeah. And I guess my passing thought, and I haven't read it, of what he said that, and here's why we believe, because of the power of her books. I just feel like the defense could have been said for Mormonism, Joseph Smith. It seemed to be a weak defense, but I don't want to make that seem like that's my arching view. I think good on them. At least they're getting up and saying, we want to reclaim the prophet. Before, I just felt like you've just brought the machine gun out, you've shot her down, and you've left us going, what do we do now? So people like me went, what do we do now? We leave. This is rubbish. So maybe we can get you back. I'm going to be doing a commentary on the book in a few weeks' time, and I'll be getting some guests to chat about it. So if you're interested,
I'll have a read of it before I volunteer to join your panel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just back on the gospel music, 70s, when the gospel first burst, luminescent in Adventism in the 70s. We were trying, I guess, with my songs to say this is the baby, not the bathwater.
Yes.
And that's all we were trying to do. There was a lot of upheaval going on, as you know, and as guests of yours have shared on your Q&A, a massive upheaval. I see Jill has produced, is thinking about 10 volumes of Place of View.
We're encouraging you to do one more.
I mean, in many cases, Peter, we still haven't gotten over that. But anyway, that's another story. Let me go back to my own, summarize very quickly where I'm coming from. Is that okay?
Yes, for sure.
All right. I just some points from our last get together, that I am a sociologist, stroke anthropologist, and I just remind listeners or those who haven't heard me that sociology, first dot point, like Jesus, I'll go so far as to say, levels the playing field. All social phenomena are equally subject to analytical criticism. No one is privileged. All are sinners. The valleys will be raised up, the mountains laid low. those who are behind will come up to the front, or everybody gets the same wage at the end of the day. So all privilege and entitlement and rank and prestige is suspended when sociologists look at something. And so when we look at the books of Ellen White, we treat them the way the Christian scholar Bernard Jowett said to treat the Bible, quote, like any other book. And so it's very hard for some Adventists to approach any writing which is putatively sacred like any other book.
Mm.
We tend to come with a whole architecture of presuppositions and assumptions and a whole framework which we overlay any book, including the Bible. And I speak as one who's just over the last 7 years been through every verse in the Bible and written them out for myself.
Mm.
It's a very hard thing to do, to treat the Bible as any other book, but it must be done. And it's very hard as Adventists to treat Ellen White's writings like any other book. But again, from a sociological perspective, that is exactly what must be done, or we never get behind the phenomena, behind the phenomenological, behind the appearance of the thing. Sociology is trying to look at the essence, what's behind, backstage of social phenomena. And so religions, as I say in the second dot point, just to remind people again, are always human. Sounds easy to say, but religions are human. And social constructions, right? We don't come up with our own religion, or if we do, we will have a place in a psychiatric institution, because religions only succeed when they become social. A religion of one is no religion at all. That's a madman, or someone who is deluded or in their own little world. Because religions are human and social constructions, they can be deconstructed very easily through heresy threats, and we see those in all religions, or they can be deconstructed analytically. I'm still on the second dot point there, through higher criticism, lower criticism, depending on whether you're looking at who wrote the thing, or when and where it was written, or how the text was put together, and so on and so forth. So anyone who's familiar with textual criticism will know that these are very deep subjects. And I guess I was interested in why Ellen White, and particularly her writings, because she's long gone from us in the 1970s, well, 60s, 70s, 80s, why she was particularly interested, why people in Adventism, scholars who you've nominated as revisionist scholars, as I would, why scholarship in Adventism was particularly interested in deconstructing Ellen White. And my question remains, and we might circle back to this later, Peter, if you want. We were deconstructing Ellen White as other Western scholars were deconstructing the Bible. Now, in some ways, Ellen White distracted us, or perhaps she allowed our intellectuals in our universities and colleges to be a subject that they could deconstruct without doing damage to the deeper fabric of Christian religion, which is Jesus Christ and the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, and so on and so forth. But these are the topics that preoccupied Western scholarship for at least the last 800 years. And they are and continue to come to the fore in religion, in Christian religious scholarship. And the world out there isn't interested in Ellen White. They're interested in the Bible and Jesus Christ. And there's, of course, a huge debate going on at the moment between the forensic Jesus and the ethical Jesus. And those who want to preserve an ethical Jesus, let's just concentrate on his teachings, forget about the blood atonement, etc., etc. and I think that is a corrupt reading of Jesus, and I say that as someone who is obviously committed to the forensic message of Christianity, not just the ethical. And I say that on the basis that the oldest parts of the New Testament are all forensic. They're not ethical. If you look at the book of Galatians, the first book of the New Testament, most scholars would agree, the first book of the New Testament, written maybe 20 years after the Christ event, it's all about the cross and the death and the resurrection. There's no mention of ethics. There's no Sermon on the Mount in that book. And Paul, who's first to put paper to pen in the apostolic era, it's another 50 to 100 years before we get all the gloss and the myth about Jesus, the ethical Jesus. Paul's ethics, he says, these are my opinions. But when he talks about what the forensic impact should be for now liberalized Christians, he says it comes through the Holy Spirit, the 9 gifts of the Holy Spirit. The Sermon on the Mount places them through the mouth of Jesus. And these are, issues, one of hundreds, if not thousands, that are looked at critically by scholars. The third dot point I make here, Peter, just by way of introduction, is that the Christian religion, including Adventism, is structured by dialectic oppositions. Clash of symbolic opposites, binary opposition, good versus bad, God versus the devil, so on and so forth. And then the final point I make there is that religions in history, no matter when or where they start hot, metaphorically speaking, and then they eventually cool. And some disappear almost through fatigue, persecution, administrative collapse, apostasy, you name it. I can remember, I won't go there, we'll be... To summarize what Adventism is not and what it is from my sociological perspective, it's definitely not a monologue. I tried to make this point last time, but it is a polyvocal heteroglossic dialogue, shared from the bottom up as much as from the top down, and it spreads out horizontally. We are not a hegemonic monolith. Adventism is not one voice, one ruler, one papal authority. We are a contested plurality. And it's not singularly seamless either. That's the third dot point. Adventism is always a diversity of perspectives. And we can't be summarized or essentialized or atomized or capsulized in our prophet. But there are a variety of relationships to her, and I'm going to come to that quickly. We're not our institutions. We are people who constitute whatever institution you like to nominate as an Adventist institution. We're not our belief system either. We all give theoretical assent when we become Adventists. But what we do in practice, of course, is a great departure. It's like the Christian church. It gives assent to being based on the Bible. But what the church practices and what the Bible says, Peter, as you know, as our listeners know, there's a gulf between the two.
Yeah.
The church has its own discourse, its own echo chamber, and what the Bible speaks and says is over here. And how we try to pull the two together, or how the church tries to ingratiate itself with Scripture, well, that's the history of Christianity. A bunch of Gentiles taking over a Jewish set of books and saying, well, this is all about us and our Saviour. And we won't go there yet, but perhaps another time, Peter, we can look at biblical analysis and critique and the history of that in the Christian church, because it is the underlying level beyond which the Ellen White scholars in Adventism are not prepared to go, and maybe that's part of the answer to your dilemma before about why things seem to be going nowhere.
Yeah.
Perhaps if we go somewhere, we'll get into even deeper problems. Finally, the last point there, Peter, is that Adventism is not static. We're not the Dead Sea. We're a flowing River Jordan. So in the final analysis, let me say what I said at the end of your last program, Peter. I am an Hellenist Adventist from the inside. I am a child of great disappointment because I grew up in Adventism, under mission Adventism, and all the emotions and knowledge that go with being in a colonial setting with mission Adventism as your main guide, leads me to all through very great and dear people.
Yeah.
I am not an anti-missionist. The problem with mission history is that the alternative was a lot worse. And the idea of growing up in a Pacific where bride strangling, cannibalism, torture, baby bashing, and so forth are normative is ludicrous. To say that the missionaries brought something worse, that is just outrageous. Missionaries saved people in the Pacific as elsewhere, literally. They made us better people, and we have to appreciate their contribution in the history of Christianity in terms of the context in which they operated at their time, and so on and so forth. And there's a whole lot of baggage that they unloaded on us in the Pacific, which we're very clever to look back now and we say, well, we shouldn't have had that. Well, of course not. But there's a lot in the world we shouldn't have had, and there's a lot we're having at the moment that continues. So, so cognitive dissonance is a way of life for me, and resolution and certainty I find only in the gospel, as you know, only in the gospel.
Yeah.
I do not find it in Ellen White. I don't find it in the church, but I appreciate, third dot point, a prophetic woman whose legitimacy, and again, I'm just working from my research back in 1981, 82, my master's thesis, this is what I'm summarizing here, comes from her visionary role as a doctrinal guide, a conflict arbitrator, her role as an institutional, that is Adventist, an architect, if you like, a portfolio confirmer. Yes, we should have somebody take charge of this concern. Adventism was a very immature organization to start with. We thought we knew a lot, but in fact, we didn't know very much at all. But that said, I'm not a prophet stoner. There is no Adventism without Ellen, as I shared with you last time. I appreciate this prophetic woman whose visionary role was doctrinal guide, and drop down to the four bottom point. She can be read like the Bible, literally, allegorically, morally, and mystically. Those are the big four, if you like. I just thought I'd remind people that the Bible isn't just read in one way, and certainly the New Testament Christians and since, we have made it a very complex, what's the word I want, set of orientations to reading the Bible. And so we have to be generous, is what I'm trying to say, Peter, that if we read the Bible in one or two or three or four of those ways, then we ought to extend to anyone who presumably fits wears the hat of a Bible prophet with some kind of flexibility, I guess is what I'd say. Ellen herself's not a monologue. As Alain de Lille said in the 12th century, pardon me, the Bible has a wax nose, and so does Ellen. So these are very old ideas. As with the Bible, not all her works are of equal value. I've got a book here in my shelves, Peter, of the church put out a little publication of hers about the evils of masturbation. Now, that sounds like a waste of time, but it reminds me, when I read it, of the sort of preoccupation of the Song of Solomon or much of the Old Testament, where, you know, we hold to the idea that all scripture is equal, sacred. All scripture is sacred and therefore of equal value. But clearly, when you read the Old Testament, it's not all equal. And scholars and Bible commentators and researchers and analysts have recognized this from the time of origin in the 2nd century all the way down to now. It's nothing new. When you get to Martin Luther, he wanted to leave 4 books out of the Bible. And he did out of his German Bible. He left the book of James, book of Esther, book of Revelation.
Wow. And
I've forgotten what the 4th book was, Peter, but he left 4 out. He just said, these are not inspired.
Wow.
They're okay for what they're trying to say. But so people have had a great disagreement, and we shouldn't come to the Bible as if it's all one precious holy book that we dare not interfere with. Now, that there is a certain Catholic aura about the Vulgate, for example. You know, they venerate St. Jerome, the first Latin Vulgate translation of the Bible, and they refused even to go beyond the Latin back to the Hebrew or the Greek. They said, we don't need to, because Jerome's inspired. His translation is inspired. Now, there are some people, I suppose, who take that view out on the far right of reactionary Adventism and say, well, I've got Ellen White, I don't need to go back to the Bible. But of course, that isn't what she recommended.
Yeah.
So anyway, there are no Adventists without Ellen. There's no Adventism without Ellen White.
Yeah.
In my thesis, I concluded Ellen White was Adventism's myth maker. And so if you're familiar with the Polish anthropologist Władysław Malinowski, said, whatever the reality of the past, the myth serves to cover the inconsistencies in historical events. William Meissner, who's a Catholic authority. I have a very Catholic, small c, universal approach to scholarship, Peter. I don't exclude anybody or anything if their pedigree is scholastic. He said, myth's primary function is to strengthen tradition, endow it with greater value and prestige by taking it back to a higher, better, more supernatural reality. He could well have been talking about, the sanctuary doctrine there, or the disappointment of 1844. Ellen White, as I said in my thesis, the 3rd dog point, made the disappointment into a necessity. So just as the Exodus and the exile of the Jewish people in the Old Testament served to define their identity, so Ellen White made the great disappointment Adventism's necessity. She rewards the group experience, and the group rewards her experience. She's the comforter for cognitive dissonance. Leon Festinger is the great theorist of cognitive dissonance.
Right.
But she was a Florence Nightingale who provided a means whereby people, quote, can act consistently. And this is where I think Peter Dixon wants to go.
Yeah.
I'm only saying that. We want to be able to act consistently. Amen to that. And Richard Sennett, incidentally, I think Catholic, but also a sociologist of great merit for me, or a social theorist anyway, a historical bent back in the 70s. And it was he who gave me the concept of charismatic delegitimation. So Ellen White was our doctrinal supervisor and adjudicator. Those doctrines was settled seemingly Now there's doubt about whether any of them have been settled. She's an architectural affirmer, structural organisation by 63, name and identity and so forth. Health institutions, the health message is the right arm of the three angels message, blah, blah, blah. Education system, and then missionary work after that. Ellen White basically eliminates ambiguity, relativity, flexibility by her absolutist rigid morality and categoric judgments. And that's another sociologist from the 70s. And here's a quote from her just to validate what I'm saying here. There's no doubt in her mind but that she is a prophet of the Lord. As Ellen White said of herself, God is either teaching his church, reproving their wrongs, strengthening their faith, or he is not. This work is of God, or it is not. God does nothing in partnership with Satan. There's no halfway work in this matter, which is an astoundingly
very
dogmatic
bold
and absolutist stuff to say, yes. And Olson in 1981, Robert Olson, I don't know whether he's still around, but he was the secretary or the head of the White estate at the time, that a church member may manifest any attitude he wishes toward Ellen White and still be considered in good and regular standing is not the case.
That's right.
In my thesis, to borrow from Ivan Illich, Deschooling Society, I don't know whether you've read that. It's a little classic on the myths of secular education. Ellen White becomes at the point of admission to Adventism its hidden curriculum. If you like, she's sort of its deep state, I guess is the word people might use today. Her publications have increased, been made universally available. Now we can better evaluate, contextualize her charismatic status. I'm so grateful for the fact that things are online now, Peter. When I was studying this work, to come to these conclusions back in 1981, 82, Arthur Patrick and his great secretary, Eleanor Scale, were in charge of the Ellen White estate up there at Avondale. And I was grateful that was there, but also because it was a time of bedlam and ferment in Adventism over Brinsmead and Ford, and particularly Des Ford and Glacier View. It was almost, do I need to know the secret handshake to get access to some of the documents? And Arthur Patrick was very great. What a great man. May he rest in peace. And Eleanor Scale, I imagine, has left us too. But I could not have completed my work without the cooperation of those two. I would ask for documents and letters, and they would share things in those days. And now, of course, it's all out there online. Just wonderful. So, as I say in my thesis, consistent with charismatic authority, hers, that's referring to Ellen White, was a clock hand dynamic absolutism, always right at every evolving moment. So she changed her mind on a number of things, on many things, and encouraged people to keep looking, keep searching. And so I connect with her. I still read Ellen White every day, Peter, because I find her work emotionally comforting in this truly lunatic age that we're living in. And I don't read them because they're sacred scripture, but I read them because they're like an arm around my shoulders. But I'll say this for Adventism, and I said it at that point, Adventists attempt to remain hot, like religions when they start, and to not cool, not to ossify. She's our attempt to keep and hold fire for fear that all we have are ashes, will become ashes. So I then went through I'm not going to do this now, Peter, but I went through a whole lot of challenges to her authority. But if I just go back to the headline here, that charisma never goes unchallenged. Never has. Luther,
Yes.
Desmond Ford, you name them, and all these people were challenged. Jesus
Yes.
Christ, you know,
Good
I mean,
point.
as soon as charisma appears,
Yes.
it's challenged. So what I wanted to get to now, if that's okay with you, very quickly through these new charismatic, new revisionist, new interclass intellectual, and a rebel, just to discuss how I discuss the work of these three chaps in my thesis. Is that okay, Peter?
Sure, and I'll bring that onto the PowerPoint now. Just before we do, just in case, to potentially correct a misguided view of what my intentions or where I hope to go, I don't seek a solution or a resolution. As an older dad, seeing the daughters come along and being raised into the Adventist world initially for the first couple of years, I seek understanding so that I can avoid danger.
Good.
So when I am not naive enough to think there will ever be resolution. I love anthropology and sociology. The book Non-Zero by Robert Wright is one of the best books ever written on that kind of topic. I've devoured it many times. I believe that solutions and resolutions are impossible. Utopia is impossible. But I believe with understanding, we can work out on the spectrum from the Pauline prophet to Jonestown massacre style prophet, that somewhere along that spectrum are prophets that are dangerous. And my kind of radar has been raised about Ellen White, in spite of all the like you say, there's beautiful things you can read, and you feel like an arm's been put around you during a world where everything is uncertain. But to me, it doesn't make it safe for some people. And so I'm trying to ascertain at what level, and I'm doing all hand movements that you can't see because you can only see the screen. At what level does Ellen White potentially bring danger to children and new Adventists that can come in and be taken off with the legalism that's there?
This is good. This is good.
Yeah. So I'm hope that helps to give you a
Thank
bit of a view where I'm coming from.
Well, this is it. I did not bring up my children in Adventism for fear of that very thing, Peter. I wanted them to have the freedom to commit to something as mature people.
Yes.
And this is the problem that I think has happened, that so many have been jackhammered. Their outlook on religion has been jackhammered into submission to this kind of regime of this is what you need to live and to get through life, and it's not. She's there as another book.
Yeah. I think what you did there with your kids, I love that idea of going, when you're old enough, you can decide for yourself. That's how I'm raising my girls.
You're wonderful.
Everything until then is maybe not, look at all the information. And if they're 25 and Renee says, I'm going to be a Buddhist, and Ruby says, I'm not going to be in anything, I'm going to be a free thinker, I love and support that decision. The problem with, and I'm glad that you were able to avoid that, and a lot of parents do, the sad thing is they have to keep their kids out of some of the Sabbath schools and the indoctrinational parapets, because for most kids raised in the Adventist church from a very young age, they will not avoid some of these dark spots. So when you look at it from a sociological, anthropological, and I loved what you said earlier, that nothing should be hidden from the rays of scrutiny, the light.
Yes.
There shouldn't be any corners that you're not allowed to go into and ask the hard questions and observe the behavioral actions and responses. Often they are predictable. I love what you said there. As a sociological person that
Yeah.
you know can see these big frameworks and predictable, even predictable not just in human behavior but in how systems rise up and fall and rise up again and fall, making the same mistakes. Do you have a sense of danger where if you were perhaps a Mormon, you could apply a lot of the same arguments in support of Adventism, but with Mormonism, it might make you go, "Oh, that's too much. I would leave that." Like, at what point? At what point, knowing that it's all still part of the framework of a sociological human behaviorist experience, at what point would you go, "This is too much"? Instead of just going, well, I'll find the good in it and nestle myself in the comfort of what can be found in pretty much everything.
Yes. Well, this is what happened to Max Weber, by the way, who is my, if you like, prophet or guru of sociology. He worked his mind to the point where he thought, I've so disenchanted the world, my inner world is collapsing. And by the correspondence between the inner world and the outer world is a very fragile one.
Yes.
If we're going to dismantle the outer world, be careful.
Exactly.
That you're not taking the planks of your own mental arc apart. All of us build an arc in our minds to get us through the turbulence. And when the turbulence goes, be careful that we don't upend or deconstruct the arc.
Yes.
And then we're left with nothing, no certainty, no hope, no assurance of anything. And I was very fearful of this happening to me, having read not only Max Weber's theory and sociology, but read his biographies, that this can happen to people, that you can end up with a precarious mental balance, from which you may never recover. And I know, sadly, some people who, as they were exiting Adventism, had to see psychiatrists to help them, talk to psychologists, find therapy groups, and I can understand that. But you and I, whenever we get the blues, we turn to our guitar.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So we have an exit.
Yes.
We have an exit. So let me press on. Is that okay, Peter?
Yes. I just want to agree with you there and just highlight that's a really good point. And it's something that since our last conversation has slowly seen me step back from trying to challenge people's beliefs. Some people, I'm trying to be more discerning, because I know that's challenging their very identity, and they could slip into, I keep forgetting, like you said, we've both got music. I go to bed happy every night. I've got a very strong inner world that's helped me navigate. I can take the Adventist jacket off and I don't have to put another one on. That's all right.
Exactly.
But I guess just before we go into the PowerPoint, having said all that and realizing that, boy, there's some dangers to letting go of that structure. Can you see there being some relevance and logic for certain people to get out of certain types of, like if we were talking about Baptists and Anglicans and Episcopalians, there's going to be problems and incredibly interesting sociological studies to be done on them as well. But I see them as relatively benign. I don't see Adventism as always being benign. And so can you give me an example of a movement or a system that you would definitely go, okay, in spite of how this might make me feel internally, I have got to get out of here? Or that you can see that others might think that? And can you give some examples?
I can. I don't think I would be happy in the Jehovah's Witness
Right.
group. I think I would have to get out of that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure I'm, only because they have a very strong anti-intellectual.
Yes,
ethic.
they do. Yes, yeah.
I don't think I ever taught a Jehovah's Witness student during 24 years of university teaching.
Yeah.
But there were. Would I be a member of, say, the Mormon? I'm not sure that I could be, only because I've researched the fantastical esoteria of their deep state theology that they don't present to the public, and it's right out there. It's way out there.
Yes.
I liked my friends in the Children of God, as they were called back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
But again, they attracted people who were sexually obsessed with that side of the religious impulse, and that made me wary of the David Koresh type figures.
Yes.
That arose also on the right fringe of independent ministries in Adventism. Although I see Adventists later disavowed any connection to David Koresh, but anyone who knew the history of the Branch Davidians know very well they were sort of a mutation of Adventist theology,
and
strong on Ellen White, strong on the Book of Revelation. You know, the books of Revelation and Daniel are two of the least applauded books of scriptural scholarship, because they're regarded as out there, you know, and yet these are the foundations of Adventism. And I'm surprised at how rational and sane Adventism actually is, how boring actually it can be, being a centrist religion, a centrist type sect. Can I come back to that,
yes,
Peter? I want to get to revisionism.
Yes. Let's do that. I really appreciate that that train of thought we've had, though. There's some really great gems that have randomly popped up there that I really appreciate.
You can remind me again of it after this.
Yeah, well, that gives me another chance to promote the new channel. Everybody, go and look up SDA Q&A highlights. It's for everyone who has shorter attention spans. Every interview is edited down from these interviews that I've done, and you can find it there, SDA Q&A highlights, or if you go to youtube.com and /@SDAQ, right, A&D, capital A, highlights, you'll find, just Google it, you'll find it. But that's the kind of place that I'll be posting later on this conversation, just those gems and the highlights. So let's get into the PowerPoint. I'll bring it up on the screen. Now, what I'll do is I'll make both of us a bit smaller, so we can still be, the audience can still see us, but they'll see the screen a bit bigger. Now, those of you that are PowerPoint aficionados, can you tell us what button to press to make the screen full? We can only see the slides with all the stuff around it. I'm sure someone will tell us, Bob. But over to you now. Share with us your PowerPoint.
All right. I'll carry on with talking. I want to just quickly talk about Brinsmead, because he sort of leads us into the Ford Glacier view, new intellectual revisionism in I think a good way. Comes from a German SDA background. You've had Bob on, I think, once or twice, or even
it might
times.
even be 3 times now.
Yes,
and apparently Gillian is organising him again in a month, so that'll be good.
Right. Well, the 60s belong to Brinsmead in Adventist, Western Adventist history. And as early as 1960, he said this, and I quoted him on page 191 of the thesis. I believe God has given me a work to do, not to organize or disorganize, but to preach the gospel. He reinterpreted 1844 in Sanctuary Fundamentals, and he told me, quote, we turned the investigative judgment into almost a big party. We turned doomsday into wedding day. That's the 1960s. It had an element of cocksure dogmatism, an element of certainty, no maybes and might be's. Okay, and if you listen to Bob tapes, read Bob writings back in that era, you'll see that's exactly right. He said, declared of the 60s, this is the decade of the awakening. That's what his followers call their movement. And to deny it is to deny the day of our visitation. 60s Adventism, Bob was the new Moses in Adventism. His followers I interviewed called him outstanding, staggering. Someone else called him another Elijah, another Luther. He had a special call, a definite call to do a special work. These are all excerpts from my thesis. His AA doesn't stand for Alcoholic Anonymous. It stands for Awakening Agitation. He says, I picked up people who wanted to take Ellen White and her blueprint for Adventism seriously, which I think is spot on. And to summarize the theology of the 60s, basically Bob was saying this, that remnant church perfectionism is a gift of the 1844 judgment. It's something to be received, not something to be achieved. In other words, we're not to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We're to gather together and pray for the latter rain, Acts 3:19, and God will give us the gift of perfection. It's not a works achievement. The last generation of, familiar, Peter, with the phrase, the last generation, is the first fruits to be ripened, that is, to reach the experience of perfection, he said in 1966. The great experiment of sin will come to its final end, he preached. The remnant will be as sinless in the flesh as Christ was sinless in the flesh. Now, that's heavy stuff. And I remember reading that in the 70s, not the 60s, and thinking to myself, my goodness, that's a heavy blow struck for perfectionist Adventism to make that kind of a claim.
Hey, just quickly, we can't see if you've changed the screen or not. Just let us know if you're adjusting.
What are you looking at?
So all I can see is the SDAQ&A, Robert Wolfgramm, May 2025.
I've been changing the screen about 20 times since then, Peter.
So that's
so. Do you want to catch up to where I am?
No, I think just give us a quick, 10 seconds on each screen. But I'm just not sure why we can't see them.
Can you see me?
I can see the screen and I can see the PowerPoint, but still only the first slide.
Oh my goodness, that's I've been turning the page thinking
and I just thought you were preambling. I thought no, that's too long a preamble.
Okay, so can you catch up to where I am so I can?
I can't control the screen, unfortunately.
So
you've just got to, if you click make the screen bigger again where you can see the slides down the side. It won't matter if we see them. Where it says the thumbnails, you'll need to click those to bring them to speed. There we go.
So how are we going here?
So that's Brinsmead phase 1. I'll just quickly read each
Yeah.
one until we catch up. So that shows the 3 books or essays.
Right. Can
Judgment,
you see
our
that?
sermons. Yes, so we can see that one.
Can
The
you see
Brinsmead
that?
phase 1. Yes, yes.
Okay. So I'll just back up a second. Back up one slide. Let's go back to.
And that's the RBD self-assessment phase 1.
Okay. Yep. So this is what he said about himself in his 60s phase. I've called it phase 1. Okay.
Yep.
God has used, top dot point, God has used my feeble efforts to light enough fires that will not be extinguished until the whole church is thoroughly aroused.
Wow.
So a very, very big claim there. Joining an offshoot, I asked Ray Martin, who was his head in Victoria. Joining an offshoot? Never. We love the Church of God now more than we ever did. Brinsmead himself, God has but one church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There is one people that are distinctly, peculiarly its own, Seventh-day Adventists. So expulsion, disfellowshipment should not in any way alter his attitude of faithfulness and loyalty to the people of the Advent movement. And he told me personally, I do not want anybody's tithe.
Right. Interesting.
So,
yeah.
So this very big concept here, which is Adventism, is sort of the new Jews. We're the new Israel. We're the new elect people of God. And
so he definitely had that view.
He definitely had that view.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And so I just had the 3 books. You can see them, can you?
Yes. Yes.
The Open Door is a book, I think, probably his first public publication, as opposed to notes and things that he used to disseminate to believers. God's Eternal Purpose, another early classic from the 60s. And the ones I prefer are these Judgment Hour sermons, books. I've got them all, which are just printed.
Post his Awakening era?
This is right in the middle of the Awakening era.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have quite a small library of Bob's 60s books. Really makes for very interesting reading.
Yeah.
Given what's happened since.
Right.
I'll press on.
Yes.
How do we get to the next page? Come on.
That says,
and of course, the church rebuffed him with errors of the Brinsmead teachings. This is just one of many books.
I've never seen these before.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is just one of many books that the church put out, usually coming from the Bible, BRI. So there was SDA, the Adventist pushback about his phase 1. And when I did my, textual search, all had to be done by hand in those days. We don't have the find button that we do anymore. I had to wade through lots of stuff of his, of the church's reactionary material. But they accused him of refusing to work in harmony, said he had the spirit of criticism, accused him of subversion and disloyalty. He had underlying hostility towards the leadership of the church. They accused him of subterfuge. He was mounting an aggressive campaign. He violated policy, failure to follow the order of the church, the council of senior brethren, and the spirit of prophecy. So, that sort of triple hammer you'll find in much of the literature of that era, Peter.
Right.
And the church's rationalization in 1955, that's the year he began writing. there can be no legitimate reason for apostasy. Just think about that. That's Brewer, who I think was one of the GC vice presidents. We're really into, very right-wing totalitarian Adventism here.
Yes.
There can be no legitimate reason for apostasy.
Wow.
My goodness, that could have fallen from the lips of the court of Caiaphas.
Yes.
Fault was individuated, never systemic. A heretic is someone who they considered in that time, and this is taken from his article published in Ministry magazine, someone who's not truly converted, someone who might have heard something disagreeable, a sensitive soul, someone who's not looking to Christ. So if you only look to Christ, imagine all the rubbish you can put up with.
Yeah.
Lacking sufficient prayer and study, might be married to a non-Adventist.
Oh dear.
My goodness.
That's me done.
Me. Talk about blame the victim.
Yeah.
Tempted by Satan. Okay.
Wow.
So it goes. 1960, so I had to do a sample shuffle through the editions of 55, 60, 65, just to get a feel for how the church was responding to Brinsmead's new charisma challenge. High on the list of reasons, namely human nature. Well, that doesn't tell you anything, but the editorial in Ministry magazine claimed that Adventism was, quote, the most democratic form of collective action. The editors asserted some men are literally born with a leadership complex. I mean, this is how you deal with people like Brinsmead. They're born with a leadership complex.
Yeah, it's incredible.
They suffer wounded pride.
Yeah.
They have frustrated ambition. I hope that's not you, Peter.
No.
They have a fatal fascination for new light. I love that phrase, Peter, so much. I turned it into a song.
Fascination for new light. You did.
I turned it into a song. I'll send it to you later after the show.
I would love to hear that.
I've never shared it around much, but
yeah.
I just thought, I love that. Whoever wrote that. Fatal fascination for new light. Okay. And finally, that they misunderstand the needs of a world organization. When I looked at material in 1965, I found this classic from Taylor Bunch. Only those who are childish or spiritually and mentally immature can be deceived by an apostate and offshoot movement. Only mature Christians are safe and will be candidates for the kingdom of God. L.C. Naden, who I think is given the thumbs up by many who knew him, was a fine Christian gentleman. He was the Australasian Division president in the 60s. He was the big man in Wahroonga when I was growing up there on the North Shore, attending Strathfield High School until 1967. He refused to have any contact with Brinsmead during the 1960s and finally met him in 1972 in the US. Brinsmead told me this in an interview in 1980, that it, quote, was such an emotional release for him. Naden went back to a friend on the West Coast and broke down and wept.
Wow.
Because he finally met us and we were human beings. What does that say about?
Yeah. And Naden was quite supportive of Des Ford, wasn't he?
Exactly. But it just shows you the fear that existed at that time.
And created by the what do you call it? The church itself, their ad hominem attacks created fear that has a powerful trickle-down effect. I remember interviewing Jim Wagner, who was the lawyer for Walter Ray around the time of of all of that, the white lie coming out and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I said to him, why do they stoop to that, ad hominem attack kind of thing? And he said, because it works. It just works no matter if you know it's happening or not, if you know you're doing it or not, it just works. Yeah.
How sad is it? How sad to confess, to admit that. But That's
Yeah.
where we were back then, Peter.
Mm.
It was a terrible time. I remember 2 students at Strathfield were expelled because they wouldn't, and their crime was to be handing out Brinsmead perfectionist brochures
Mm.
to the fellow students. Darrell Davies was one, and Ernst Klotz was the other guy. I just shudder to think what kind of mind was running things, but I've since read a lot about the authoritarian personality and
Yeah.
totalitarianism. Anyway, as we know, Brinsmead moved into phase 2, as I call it, because his Reformation reading was a key influence on his thinking.
Yeah.
And in May, that's the Easter, and the December Duranbar Bible camps, or institutes as they were called, he made these announcements. 1, we've been unsound in our focus. 2, subjective. 2, experience focus. Not enough of the forensic external righteousness and the work of Christ for us as believers. We've been wrong in our definition of the gospel because we've included imparted righteousness, sanctification as part of our definition of the gospel. And when all this was made clear through a whole series of presentations, which I have for anyone who's interested, the response from his awakening agitation followers was question mark, question mark,
Yes,
question mark.
exactly. Yeah.
Ray Martin told me it horrified us.
Wow.
Point 3 there. We couldn't come to grips with it. We couldn't see what it was all about.
Wow.
And they confronted Bob.
Wow.
Bob sat there and cried. All his old mates, talking about Martin and others,
Yeah.
he'd lost them all. All who'd been with him the longest rubbished him. We went out of that meeting laughing at him.
Incredible. Wow.
Incredible.
That's gold. What you've uncovered there is amazing. And you were interviewing these guys in 1980.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, that's a gold mine of a resource there.
It
I
is.
personally, just for the record, have a huge amount of respect for Bob Brinsmead because I don't view any of his changes in life as flip-flopping. I think he was a man that had an inquiring mind and genuinely researched things and then drew conclusions and made changes.
Yes.
Just a quick question on that.
Yes.
The guy, you just mentioned his name that you'd interviewed.
Ray Martin.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did he continue on with the awakening movement? I know when we chatted last time, you said it's still going to this day, but he stayed on as leader kind of thing.
He did stay with Bob. After all this, he said they got up and they went to see him at his study, and I'm sure Bob remembers this, and they literally rubbished him, as he said to me on tape. I've got the interview on tape.
Wow.
It's digitized even. We went out of that meeting laughing at him, he said, and they were so disappointed because it seemed to them that Bob had thrown everything that they had been, championing through the 60s.
Yeah.
And then in the 70s and 80s, along comes Douglas and all these other dudes who picked that all up and they run with it.
Incredible.
It is
even
incredible.
the Standish brothers and
The Standish brothers.
Just a quick question I may be preempting. Is this with Verdict that came out? I'm just holding it up for the screen. One of the issues I've got, the October 1981. So the period you're talking about is just before he launched out into Verdict, or I think it was called Plain Truth. No, what was it first?
Present Truth.
Present Truth. And that merged into Verdict.
Yes.
Which a lot of people have said to me, and I've read this particular issue I'm holding up is called Jesus and the Law. A lot of people have said that if you're looking for that gem of Adventism that captures Ellen White in perspective, biblical exegesis, this is the place to find it.
Right, I see.
Would you agree that there was that period that he had where you could sort of say, you know what, I think he really encapsulated what Adventism truly could be? Or
I told him once that I thought what he was doing in the 60s was perfecting traditional Adventism,
yes,
and no finer statement about it could be found. I don't think. I've looked through a lot of those Adventist authors from the 30s, traditionalists I'm talking about,
yeah,
and their stuff is lame. It's lame
yeah.
compared to
Well,
what Bob.
would I be right in saying that that period, the 60s period,
Yep,
was
yep,
him totally encapsulating a
yep.
really great definition of what traditional Adventism is?
Correct,
And then his
correct.
next era into the 80s is
Yep,
a fantastic definition of what a revisionist Adventist looks like.
absolutely correct.
So he's done
Let,
the
let,
church a fascinating service there.
oh
He's
well,
defined the two sides.
that's Bob. That's why I regard him as a prophet.
Yeah.
He's got the score on the board. Anyway, let me press on, and you'll
Yes,
see
yeah.
that
This is great. Thank you. Keep going.
for some of his awakening, this is the top dot point. They were a bit doubtful. Others thought they better go home and reevaluate and think about it. One American awakener I interviewed, digitized, it brought him, that's Brinsmead, he told me, up very high in my estimation. The fact that he could change, whereas in the church, no leader would admit a mistake. That is an incredible insight, I thought.
Very, very good.
I don't know what happened to Bob Johnson, but may he rest in peace.
Mm.
At the end of the 60s, Bob told me in an interview, it was like looking at a building and saying, mate, knock it down.
Yes. that explains or defines his personality.
It does.
Very well.
He said, in 1969, I felt like I was suffocating, like I wanted to know what made him want to change. He said it was almost overpowering. We began to suffocate. No sooner had we got it finished than we said, let me out of here. I'm suffocating. And this is true of all religious theological palaces, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
The truth is not meant to be in a box in heaven or in a box on earth. It's the Holy Spirit blowing wherever it wants to blow, Peter. And you know what it is like to stand with the wind in your face and you go, wow, thank you, Lord. This was a complete turnabout. He told Joy Slade Hawken was one of his secretaries who typed up most of his sermons during the 60s. This was a complete turnabout. The whole box and dice were tipped upside down, but we were thrilled with the news. I imagine Joy's gone, but did you ever know her?
Who was that?
Travels? Joy Slade, Joy Hawken, she became.
Yes, yeah.
She lived in the Blue Mountains.
Right.
She was an amazingly vivacious, energetic.
Was she at Avondale in that 80 to 84 period?
No. She was an older woman, Bob's generation.
Right.
And he trusted her with his work. And she was married originally to one of his right-hand man, a guy called John Slade.
Right.
John Slade wrote after a few years with Brinsmead, he defected back to Adventist mainstream and wrote a little book called Lessons from a Detour. And then he changed his mind again and ended up back with Bob. And Bob took him back, said, yeah. And anyway, she said to me when I interviewed her, talking about Bob, this is the last dot point there, he took us back to the Bible and we started getting Ellen White in perspective. So during phase 1, you'll remember Bob was anti-questions and doctrine.
Yes, very much.
He called it a step back toward Protestantism. and and closing up the breach between Adventism and Protestantism. So Catholics are bad, Protestants not so bad, Adventism, we're the good guys, and the Awakening, we're the super good guys. There was definitely a hierarchy there. At one point, I asked him whether he got influenced by eugenic theory that influenced a lot of right-wing Christian thinking back in the beginning of the 20th century. As a result of the impact of Darwin and so forth. And I asked him, because I'd read in one of his earlier tracts about, this new seed, this new sort of generation, and the idea of God fertilizing a purer, and it got very close to that sort of language of breeding a super elite Christian.
So breeding instead of genes, but kind of psychological memes and ideas.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
weeding out the ones you didn't want. Yeah, boy, what a shift into phase two.
It was a huge thing. Just to get you to understand what happened to him. The church said, quote, only a few of our people were ever affected. But in the 70s, Brinsmead came to be looked upon as a greater threat than ever. That's Paxton. Also, if you read R.W. Schwartz's authoritative history of Adventism, he puts Brinsmead as the most troublesome, quote unquote, the church has ever seen.
Wow.
Role reversal in Lowell, our dear friend Lowell's book, Edges of Adventism. He said the GC in Washington could hardly believe their eyes and ears when Bob, his brother John, and Dr. Jack Zwemer fronted up and, quote, told them that the Awakening movement was finished. Neil Wilson couldn't understand, Bob told me when I interviewed him. I think they were really jealous. In fact, when we gave it away, they took it up.
Yes.
Their ultimatum to him was to stop publishing independently. And of course, he refused.
Yeah.
He went into his second phase to challenge Adventism in two ways. One, rediscover your Protestant roots. And two, Protestantism should accept us as being what Paxton called the heirs of the Reformation. And so Present Truth magazine refocused from publishing his Judgment Hour sermons, as they were called, to Protestant classics, reprints, commentary, and of course taking up the Protestant sola scriptura, sola fide, sola Christos. Adventism, he said in the 70s, should purge itself of its Catholic Tridentine compromise, that's including sanctification with the definition of in the definition of the gospel with justification, and should clarify its Protestant heritage exclusively. In 1975, he didn't publish it, to friends, The Theology of Ellen White, in which he recast her as a Protestant. He said this about her: she stands in the great stream of church history, clearly a religious phenomena and literary genius in her own right.
Wow.
Oh, whoops. Can you still see that, Peter?
No, we can see the yellow, orange, and pinkish books.
The books.
Covers.
Now, what's happened here? Where have they gone? Did I hit the button accidentally?
Must have.
Is that better?
We can still see the three Present Truth.
Right.
Books.
Can you see what they are?
Yes. There's Present Truth, Reconciliation Between Awakening and Church Administration. Present Truth, 10 Years of Awakening. And then the third picture is the Australian Institute Messages on Justification.
Right. Would you like me to make this bigger somehow?
No, I think we can see that pretty well. But yeah,
okay.
if you can. I'm just worried it might.
right in 1970, the third one, the third publication there, the Australian Institute Messages on Justification, were his 1970 sermons. So they were transcribed into that book
right.
from May and December of 1970. The material that I was just describing to you, that the ferment amongst his followers,
Yes.
those were the times when he confronted them with that. And 10 Years of the Awakening was the first of many summaries that he presented to try and summarize his time, his work during the 60s. Now, can I move this on?
Yes.
What have I done?
You might have to do it by the cursor down the bottom, the little arrows.
Oh, my goodness. Let's get back to... No, I've lost the screen somehow.
Oh, okay.
What have I done, Peter?
I wish I could control. I wish I could be an admin administrator and control your content.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, dear.
I'll bring some funny comments in while you're just checking that. MC has written, how about getting Doge to clean up the corruption?
That's good.
Sir Nilo has written, I vote Brinsmead for the GC president. And someone did ask you a question. Bob, do you engage in religion as a necessary human experience rather than strictly as belief?
Yes, I'd agree with that. I'm just having trouble, Peter, getting this thing happening again. Somehow
you
keep talking and doing your thing, and let me...
Yeah. If you get your cursor down the bottom right there, does it change? For example, just experiment.
Okay.
Have your cross connection? Oh, there we go. That's the right place. So Here we go. Awesome.
Okay.
Phase 3.
Yep. So phase 3 was Brinsmead in the 80s. He kind of planned his charismatic career by the decade. And so that was my summary. To the right of Ellen White, and then to the left, and then right out altogether from Ellen White. He came right out from under her in the 80s, if I may put it metaphorically. May 1979 Institute, he failed to convince supporters that the sanctuary doctrine was compatible with Reformation gospel. Can you see that point, Peter? Are you able to read what I'm reading?
Doing a quick check. Yes, there we go. You've got the phase 3, 1979, 1844 re-examined. Right.
So he failed to convince his own followers at his Easter Bible camp meeting up in Durambo, where he held them, that the sanctuary doctrine of Adventism was compatible with the Reformation gospel. By December, 9 months, 6 months, whatever later, he repudiated the sanctuary doctrine altogether, declaring there was no two-phase atonement, two-part atonement, no investigative judgment, no basis for 1844 in prophecy. And he said that Adventism risked being as anachronistic, pardon me, as the Flat Earth Society if it maintained outmoded 19th century arguments, as he put it to me.
And that was 1980,
Yeah.
And see, here we are, 2025. I'd say that's still a fair comment.
Yes, that's right, Peter. It is. That's right. I mean, have we travelled anywhere? Have we gotten anywhere?
And that's, I guess, why I call today's program, an SDA revisionist lament. Like, I'm wanting us to go, have we gotten anywhere?
Thank you.
This is, I think, an important question for the revisionists to ponder, a sense of accountability, and not just observe what has been said, but where we actually are. And again, not to try and change it or resolve it or find a solution, but to just understand the mechanisms of it so you can avoid
Yes.
aspects of it or all of it or some
Yes.
of it. Yeah.
Yes. Amen to that. You know, I'm happy to. I've digitized my master's thesis now, and I'm happy to send you a copy, and you can
I
keep
would
it in
love
some
that.
resource
Yeah.
trove that you've got there, because I have no more use for it
Oh man, I'd
on
love that.
my shelves anymore. So
Yeah.
in 1980, he declared that the gospel spells the quote the end of Adventism. Like Rome, can you see these points, Peter?
Yes. Yes.
Adventism has two sources of authority, the Bible and an infallible interpreter. He's talking about Ellen White there. Adventism has become the cult of Ellen White. Adventists are grinding themselves to death under the crushing burden of living up to Ellen White. Ellen White is Adventism's greatest instrument for making people feel guilty and thereby subjects of ecclesiastical manipulation. Whew, the very thing, Peter, that we strive to avoid. He saw it all back
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
at the end of the 70s.
Mind blowing.
And so he claimed in that Judged by the Gospel book of 1980 that Ellen White's library, her personal library, had over more than 400 mostly non-Adventist authored. We know all this stuff now.
Yeah.
Others had a hand in the construction of her writings. She plagiarized extensively.
Yeah.
Mistakes were glossed. She did not discourage adoration. And then he said this, it is not the Ellen White critics, but the Ellen White apologists who have done her the greatest disservice.
Amen. That's what I've been
So,
saying for 2 years.
you know, there's a something to think about,
Yeah.
Peter, and sobering truth of understanding the situation. In 1981, he came out with Sabbatarianism Re-Examined, and he said that it's time to throw out the Sabbath. I'm a bit tired of Adventism, he told me in an interview. I'd rather think about something else. This is the second dot point there.
Yes.
I think I've written my last burst on it.
Wow.
And then thinking about the past, the 60s and the 70s, he says, we were bushmen, brash, confident and cocky, and ready to have a go. Only boys, but who sparred with fellows at Andrews University. There's not much left. Second bottom dot point. Traditional Adventism is finished. And then he rejected the Sabbath and said it was a wall of separation between believers and others.
Can I just bring in a couple
that's the end of Bob.
Right.
And now I'm about to enter into
Awesome.
Des's revisionism.
Oh, good. Well, I'll just quickly insert a couple of comments and questions because
Sure.
there's a lot coming through and they'll disappear otherwise.
I'll just go and get some water.
Yes,
Is that okay?
you totally. Chris Lucas, the Protestant View Live. How you going, Chris? I think I've been getting your emails. Let's get you on the show. You've sent me, I think, some of your work recently. It's not like it was once a church founded in truth and then over time became corrupt, because then you could save it or alter it. But it's something created out of a lie. And yeah, I agree with you, Chris. I think one of the potential problems that the revisionist academic historian scholars face is they've uncovered this so much revealing content that exposes Ellen in some pretty bad light, but they've done it in a way that just assesses the situation. Sorry, just outlines the situation, places it on the table, and lets you go away and make a decision. And for me, you know, I love what Bob Wolfgramm was saying earlier, where phase one defined traditional Adventism. I've always said there's two general types of Adventist. And then phase two defined the more progressive revisionist kind of Adventism. But then as he entered phase 3, he sounds like he gave them all away, because I think he realized that it was based on a lie. And we'll get Bob's thoughts on that. But what people do with that information themselves is a personal decision. And Adrian writes, and Adrian, did you send me Judged by the Gospel? I got it recently, either from Lowell Tarling or from you, Judged by the Gospel. And Adrian writes that Bob's book, Judged by the Gospel, is his all-time favorite book. We're just looking at some comments there, Bob, and Adrian has written that Judged by the Gospel is his all-time favorite gospel book. And Chris had written that, the main reason you cannot save Adventism and you just have to leave the church is because it's not like the church was founded in truth and then became corrupt. It was founded on lies. And I think I'm not saying that Bob Brinsmead would have concluded that it was based on lies. I'm not sure, but he made some pretty bold statements there in phase 3. But phase 1 was very much this assessment and really well-defined version of what traditional Adventism actually was. Phase 2, as you pointed out, was a very much a gospel Adventist revisionist approach, and the church has got this beautiful content that they can actually, if for a progressive gospel Adventist, they can go, well, here it is. This is our manifest almost. But then he went to phase 3 and did what I've done. Just to leave, because I just felt that revision was futile and that there's too much danger lurking there for the young kids and for people coming into it. But Bob Wolfgramm, my guest today, has stayed in the church. And would you suggest you're possibly, what you're about to reveal now, some of the Des Ford style aspects of Adventist revisionism, would you say that the Bob Brinsmead phase 2 and what you're about to share now are the parts of Adventism you're trying to fan a flame under?
Trying to keep alive.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's possible, Peter, but Bob was always generous to the administration. He gave them the benefit of the doubt and to our history. So he would not have considered them lies, as though his statement that we were Bushmen applies not only to him but to the pioneers too.
Right.
And the elevation of the pioneers into the sort of Catholic sainthood status that it's just ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous, They were scratching around like Bushmen, looking to put together something that they could hold on to in their time, which is not the same something I want to hold on to in my time.
No.
And so that's all. Well, not all, but that's a part of what I think revisionists are trying to do, is to salvage dignity, integrity,
yes,
at every step of the way. And my friends, we are in a post-Christian crisis, speaking outside of Adventism. Faith is collapsing through a whole series of internal and external forces and factors. And, I don't know what an AI Christianity is going to look like, Peter, but I'm sure it's coming.
Yeah. Oh, look. Yeah. And just before we move into the Des Ford side, just because I always, when I chat to you, I always have a lot of self-reflection. And you mentioned that you hoped I wasn't following something ambition. What were you meaning with that one? Just so I can.
No, I wasn't meaning it in any serious in any serious sense.
And I didn't take offense. I literally just go, oh, anything that I think I can learn from that someone's being honest with me about, I take on board in a good way.
I was being impish and facetious.
Right.
So
Right.
I was not.
If we're talking about revisionist lament, I lament that I don't have the ambition gene.
Yeah,
And
right.
to just wander and float along.
Neither do I. Neither do I. I sometimes lie cogitating as to how come I wasn't interested in office, either in church office or in university office.
Yeah.
I was just happy to do my research and find things out that enlightened me and illuminated my mental world. But
I think you and I produce a lot of content, but it's often, and I'm guessing you might be the same, you'll suddenly go, oh, wow, I just wrote 12 songs, or I've just done 12 shows or whatever.
Yes.
It's not something that you're necessarily planning to do.
No,
you just observe that it's happened because you've been immersed in it. I think you and I share that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I wasn't meaning, any kind of ambition beyond, into that capital A type ambition. But
yeah.
I do wish, I do wish that I could resolve the dissonance I have and have always had about, lots of things, not just what we're talking about. Okay, well, I'll press on. Is that all right, Peter?
Yes, please.
You've got the card up there, Ellen White's admonition regarding the intellect.
I've made you and me bigger on the screen, and it's good. It's made the actual slide bigger for some reason.
Oh, okay.
So that's
good. She says things like this, and I've just plucked 3 of her quotes. Our Saviour did not despise learning or education. Our colleges should be far in advance in the highest kind of education. His servants shall possess more intelligence and clearer discernment than the worldling. I don't know what she was thinking there, but if that's taken seriously, okay, I will take it seriously, and I have, Ellen. It lays upon us the obligation of developing the intellect to its fullest capacity. Now, come on. Is that encouragement to do the kinds of things that the church's intellectuals have done? Of course it is. There's those 3 quotes alone are the charter, which, I shake her hand happily and say, you're spot on here, my good lady. This, I have had people, other Adventists, conscientious Adventists, come to me here and in the island, in Fiji, asking whether they should allow their child to pursue their sporting prowess.
Right.
And I say to them, do you believe God's given them that gift of speed on the athletic track field, of power on the rugby field? Where's that come from? Has it come from God?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, then I say, doesn't Jesus said to develop your talents to the ultimate? And then I hit them with this sort of quote, that says, even your church prophet encourages you to be the finest and best at whatever you do. So why is it an issue? Why is it an issue? If you're meant to play guitar like Jimi Hendrix, play it.
Exactly. Amen.
Sing like Dion or whoever the singers are, sing. I mean, Peter, you've met it in the arts. I'm sure you have people who've said, oh, I had to give up rock and roll because I was too good at it. Well, hang on. What does that mean? You get to the judgment day.
I lament turning down a couple of good tours because I'd have to have played on a Friday night.
Oh, my saddest thing, isn't it?
And you would have had even better opportunities that you turned down.
All that stuff. You know, we had a gig with who was it? With the Hells Angels. Peter, I met Bob Bering.
Yeah.
You know, met him personally. G'day, Bob. I
Yeah.
believe you write songs, you know, stuff like friends of mine. I was shivering in my boots, but I couldn't bring myself to do the gig. You know, I just couldn't.
Yeah. Just a little side thing, and again, not to get gushy, because those who know me know that your music influenced me hugely. One of the things that really stood out about your 3 albums that kind of crossed my path, 79 to 83 or 4 or whatever, the All My Friends Are Sinners, your Bob album, the Refugee, and the kind of mild punk of what was it called? The
Persecution Game.
Persecution Games. What I loved about that was those albums and the talent of the musicians on the albums could stand up in any professional setting. I lament, again, we're using the word from the title today, I lament that the church didn't embrace its sports people, its creative people, its artists.
Oh,
Because
sad.
imagine if people had built on the kind of thing that you were doing then, and that you could have traveled around the country and run workshops for people like me, who were about a little bit younger.
So sad.
And we could have passed that on to others. And I did try to do that through the 80s and the 90s. And it constantly, you would just be shut down at some point. And I just think, whoa, imagine the Adventist church if it had kept its Brinsmead and its Fords and its Bob Wolfgrams, and the creativity would have been exploding from it. I remember in Auckland one time singing at it was a national like a music competition of singers and songwriters and bands and the whole thing, and the top 3 places overall were taken by Adventist musicians.
I love it.
Yes, and it's something I lament, and I think, what things can the Adventist church do to try and that's why I cajole a lot of the revisionists and academics and scholars. And that's why, like, we right at the start of the program, I played that clip of Don McAdams, where they've written now this book of reclaiming the prophet, and they seem to finally be doing something about it. But is it too little too late? And is it a bit too weak? And in our last interview, we chatted, and I said, what gives you hope and why are you still positive? And
if they intend to reclaim the wrong Ellen White, then we're getting nowhere.
Exactly, yeah. And then if they reclaim it, and Ted Wilson's politics just shuts it down again, which I've literally seen that kind of shutting down since Canwright. Not seen it personally. Of course, I'm not that old, but I just. It's a really hard one to sound critical of the people I admire the most, but I just wonder at the naivety of this hope that they have. I just don't see any chance of changing. And so I understand then being cultural and enjoying, as you said earlier, that almost warm embrace as you read some aspects of Ellen White and some of the. I then get that. I go, awesome, that's great.
Yeah. The culture wars, mate. We've been through them.
Yes,
we've been through them. Adventism has been involved in culture wars at least since the 50s and 60s.
Yeah,
and I never thought about what we were doing in the end of the 70s with Galilee and the albums, the 3 albums we produced. I never thought about it in terms of its context, but people like you and others have helped me understand where we sat in the stream of things.
Yeah. Well, it had a huge impact, and if the administration had gotten behind it, it would have had a huge, long-lasting footprint.
Yeah.
I've said this to you before. The reason I started, I'm just going to quickly grab it.
Go ahead.
I'll quickly I hope I can find it. I put it aside especially. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Two things. We're a live show. We can do this. I've got your. Oh, here we go. Boy, I can't believe I found the things I wanted so fast. I found the Galilee story, which,
okay.
if people try and track that down online, what a great read. Inspirational in the sense of what could have been, what a fantastic little label you had. And secondly, I started the whole SDA Q&A thing, and I found this the other day. I started a magazine called Tempo, and I wrote articles, and here's page 2. I had CD reviews, tips on playing guitar, worship music, a gig guide, and I had letters to the editor.
Yeah.
I had classifieds where we were advertising stuff, and I had a full Bob Wolfgramm article interview with you. Now, I'm trying to work out when I did this, because I feel like I was very advanced in my this is like, I'm talking mid-90s, maybe 1995 or something.
Amazing, Peter.
I had that dream back then to create a platform that promoted the arts of the past, to keep them alive, to create a platform for future artists, and to honor the artists that were there at the time. And I released maybe 5 of these, and this was the first one, and I wanted you to be in it. And essentially that dream of that magazine just kept dying and get shut down. and I ran it independently. I didn't get any money from the main body. But eventually, with social media, I was able to do SDA Q&A. The SDA Q&A is an exact extension of that magazine.
Wow.
It was inspired by you and Ray Dixon, who was no relative of mine, spelt differently, who had a #1 hit in 1957. And I was chatting to people in the 90s saying, oh, you guys have got to listen to Bob Wolfgramm, and Ray Dixon's got this great song that he released in 1957. They're Adventists and they have this great music. And no one knew about this incredible content of the 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, bands that I was in. And so I had a resolve to really create something that
marvelous
has eventually become SDA Q&A.
Marvelous. Well, there you go. See, it bears fruit, doesn't it?
It bears fruit. And even though I'm now not an Adventist and I'm looking in from the outside, I do want to present all sides of Adventism and give them a platform. So there we go. There's a bit of trivia for those.
It's sad, isn't it, that you couldn't get the church interested in your energy.
Yeah.
You couldn't. They couldn't see it or something. I remember. I hardly ever. I don't think I've worn a suit more than half a dozen times in my life. But I had a suit. I put it on. I made a trip up from Melbourne to Wahroonga. I went to see the heads of the studio there in Wahroonga. This is about 1977.
Right.
And asked them, would they be prepared to back an album of my songs?
Yeah.
No.
I know. No. And look, they've tried. They started Salter, which did a lot for reproducing a lot of your music.
I'm very grateful that they reconsidered.
But they, that had so much pushback that'd be very difficult to say that it's been a successful influencer.
Yeah.
But my first question to you ever when this dream was realized was, when you were a teenager, how did you relate the church, spelling mistake there, the church to your desire to make music? And were there kindred spirits within the church during those years? A bit of a naive question, but it was a start.
Yeah, that's right. That's wonderful, Peter. Wonderful. Shall I press on?
Yes, and those watching, thank you for letting me indulge my little sidetracking. It was a good memory to relive just then, and I came across it
Marvelous,
yesterday. Yeah.
marvelous times.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just want to outline, Peter, that when we think of intellectuals, there are at least two kinds, or fundamentally, and I'm following Max Weber here. They are either integrative priests who are oriented to legitimating the status quo of whatever,
Yep.
who become apologists for continuity of tradition, don't change, or they are revisionist prophets, open
Right.
to critical evaluation, open to dissent, and willing to change, open to change. An important theorist in this distinction is Antonio Gramsci, who, following Marx, similarly distinguished between traditional intellectuals, who are the priestly pawns of any ruling regime. He called them the deputies or hired prize fighters of a hegemonic ruling class, and there were certainly some of those at Glacier View. Or they can be organic intellectuals, people who are thrown up, in his words, to meet the needs of consciousness raising among newer social orders. And consciousness raising, as I said last time, Peter, is, I think, a part of your brief and a very important thing that you're doing for a lot of people within and without, on the fringes of Adventism. Other theorists have distinguished between intellectual integrators, who again act as preservers or caretakers for the tradition or the status quo, and intellectual innovators, who function as moralist gatekeepers, opening the gate of ideas. And Bob Brinsmead, and then this whole group of people behind Des Ford and others who were embedded in Adventism in American universities in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Following C.P. Snow, I don't know whether you read
Yes.
C.P. Snow when you were at high school, but I did.
Yeah.
It was from the scientists that came heretics, forerunners, martyrs, traitors. Thomas O'Day, Catholic sociologist, great, notes intellectuals of all kinds face a, quote, Socratic tension, that is, of trying to resolve tradition with rationality, stability with continuity, institutional needs with personal ones. I mean, wow, there's a big triangle of tensions that he calls the Socratic tension of intellectual life in any religious organization. In religious settings, the bottom dot point, following O'Day, I said intellectual confrontation and examination may be experienced as sacrilegious or blasphemous, and the intellectuals, like the 70 men of Beth Shemesh, who deserve to be stained by divine retribution because they looked into the ark of the Lord. So it's a very risky business. If you've read anything of the history of heresy in Christianity's, well, since origin, since the 2nd century, and particularly around the Arian heresy, we have a history, we share a history with all other Christian denominations and the great Catholic Church of presiding over a history of heresy trials, of intellectual confrontation, you know, I was found it remarkable, Peter, that atheists, to be branded an atheist, was specifically anti-Catholic to start with. If you denied the papacy and the priesthood, the immortality of the soul, the existence of heaven or hell, or the denial of the efficacious character of the sacraments, any time in the Middle Ages to the Reformation, you were branded an atheist.
Yeah, that's right. Wow.
From the Reformation down to the Enlightenment, if you denied the Trinitarian doctrine,
Mm.
biblical creation, denied that the spiritual and metaphysical world existed, if you denied scriptural prophetic authenticity and authority, and if you denied the biblical relevance to the societal order, you were branded an atheist.
Wow.
So atheism hasn't always meant the same thing in our 2,000-year history. It's only come to mean the denial of God's existence and the denial of God's moral qualities and his providential involvement in the world since the Enlightenment. So the modern concept of an atheist is really only over the last 300-400 years
Wow.
of history. And there are histories of atheism now that put the picture right. But let me carry on. Adventist
Now,
New
just
Intellectual.
quickly, Bob, I've just got to
Yeah.
quickly go and put the dog out. It's somehow gotten into the shed. I can hear you. Keep going. I'm just going to
Really?
remove myself from the screen. You keep going. I can hear you. Otherwise it's going to get into trouble in the back of the studio. So I'll just quickly race and take it out.
Okay,
You
Peter.
keep going. I can hear you, and
Okay.
we're still live. I'll be right back.
Okay. In the 60s, there came into existence what I call new intellectual Adventists. New intellectual Adventists. So the old intellectual Adventists were the kind that were conservators, preservers, integrators. It's all right to think new ideas, so long as those new ideas don't challenge the fundamentals and of the pioneers. But arising in the post questions on doctrine era of the 50s and 60s, there came to be what I call a new speech community. Well, these are not I'm not originating these phrases. A subculture of critical discourse, as it came to be called. And their attitude was, and I'm following a sociologist called Alvin Gouldner here, who in 1978 said nothing that speakers, there are no sacred cows. There's nothing that speakers will not, on principle, permanently refuse, that speakers will, on principle, permanently refuse to discuss or make problematic. So this new openness to talk about ourselves, our history, our identity, our prophetic figure, as I said at the start of this a couple of hours ago. I'm sorry, that this changed in the post-war period. New intellectuals specialize in questions of legitimacy. That's Seymour Martin Lipset, who made that point back in the 1970s. The new intellectuals produce an adversary culture, quote unquote. This adversary culture upsets the established order, and many governing elites exhibit, as a result of the work of new intellectuals, a failure of nerve. How are you going, Peter? Are you back at your desk, or are you still sorting out cows in the paddocks? So I'll carry on. 20th century revisionist Adventism then evolved originally from the fact that our fundamentals were malleable. They appeared to be dogmatic absolutes nailed down by the pioneers, but as investigation by our new intellectual historians in our universities in America, predominantly, Andrews and Loma Linda, 1960, 1961, as they began to examine these issues in Adventism of our history and our identity, they began to see that we needed to revise our understanding of what these amounted to. In 1960, as I think we have learned through the passing of time, and Peter has produced some evidence here. Some of the speakers have spoken about the rise of the Association of Adventist Forums and the journal Spectrum in 1968. Roy Branson was very influential in that, and when his grandson Ronald Numbers, who wrote one of the first to write a devastating critique of Ellen White's authority in the area of health, when he produced the book Prophetess of Health. He came to Australia in the early 80s. I managed to grab him and interview him.
Wow.
And he gave me a quick thumbnail sketch of Roy Branson, who's his grandpa or great uncle, or
Boy,
I forget.
interesting.
Great to have you back, Peter.
Yeah, sorry, I've been back
good.
a minute or two. All good.
All good. And
yeah.
And the journal Spectrum. So
Yes.
he's the one who explained to me how Spectrum Journal came to be and how Adventist Forums came to be. Ronald Numbers, I'm talking about. I interviewed him in Cal Stewart's home in Camberwell.
Have you got that on an audio recording?
I have it, and I sent it to Jill, and I believe Jill has got somebody modifying the sound so it can be put up as a digital.
Boy, that'd be good to
digital
put on the
resource.
show one day. Yeah.
But it's quite heartbreaking listening to Ronald Numbers. I caught him maybe 3 or 4, 5 years ago, just before he died.
Yeah, yeah.
Not knowing he was ill, but telling him I had discovered in my cassette archives the interview I did with him, and would he like a copy? And he very happily took that opportunity, and so I did. The last contact I had with him was to send him a copy of what he said to me about and I used the phrase with Jill about friends who were just disappearing into the night. He said that it was very evocative, very emotional. Feedback I got from him, because he had just gone through divorce. His church had turned its back on his research. He was a truly brave post-Adventist crusader. He was, he's a fourth generation Adventist on both sides of his family. He was the golden-haired boy who was going to be the champion of new intellectual Adventism, and instead it took him out, and he couldn't live in the congregation of Adventism anymore, and he talks about it. I'll stop trying to summarize him.
Do you think, like, if you had a chance to, or did you have a chance to talk to him and share your reasons for staying, like in a way that may have influenced him?
No, because at the time that I was interviewing for my research, I had no intention of staying.
Right.
So it wasn't. I was totally, committed myself to leaving at that point, and my dearest, closest friends, Lowell and Genna, had assumed that I had left. And were shocked in 1995 when I wrote letters to them personally to tell them that I had gone back to church and was going to keep going back to church, and outlined the reasons why I had chosen, after a decade, 15 years, if you like, of nomadic wandering. Why I had needed an emotional place to locate myself, and
To create
explain
an
the
anchor.
reasons. To their credit, they challenged me, and to their credit, when I gave them my reasons, they didn't dispense with me or dispose of me.
Yeah.
The friendship remains as it has between us, Peter, despite
Yeah.
our different stances on this
Yeah.
material that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'll just finish this
Yes. Yes.
card. Significant numbers of church members began attending non-Adventist graduate schools during the 60s, which sharpened critical thinking, their church's beliefs and practices. That's Richard Osborne. I don't know whether he's alive or not, and whether you have
Not sure.
accessed him in your archival digs.
No, I don't think so.
Adventist historian at the time. He's probably disappeared from many pastoral sermons and many denominational journal articles seemed unreasoned, if not unreasonable, shallow, if not irrelevant, and, that's a typo, illogical, if not downright anti-intellectual. That's Osborne took commenting on the 60s. But of course, the church pushed back, just as it did when it has new challenges from within its own ranks in 1888. And these issues are still plaguing Adventism, as this program and others are. And I made the point last time that I believe questions on doctrine to be the end of Adventism's monologue, really.
Yeah.
It was the beginning of our modernity, and Ford was the truth of it.
Yes.
Jumping very quickly through the 70s to get to Ford, 1977 was a year in which there was an attempt to create and enforce a creed. I don't know whether you remember that.
Yes.
And W.J. Hackett was the, I think, vice president at the time, asking how deviant should the church allow a member's viewpoint and lifestyle to be, and yet consider him a part of the fellowship. The line must be drawn somewhere. So the boundary umpires are there.
Yes.
Starting to get to work again. 1977, a creed was proposed to fix certain landmarks that were held to be, quote, non-negotiable, and halt the slide into, quote, liberal theology with resulting, quote, loss of identity. So you can see the slippery slide there. Thinking. It reminded me of, we've got to go and fight in Vietnam, because if they get out of Vietnam, they'll be into Malaysia and Singapore and then Indonesia and then Australia. And, communists will be taking over the world.
Head them off at the pass.
That's right. So the creed was proposed for administrative cleansing, i.e., to protect the subtle influence of those who have become unclear and doubtful about Ellen White, against those who advocate making the gospel more modern and science-oriented. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
That is classic.
That
is classic.
And of course, the intellectuals refused to concede to that. And a statement of concern was issued from, quote, a conference of Bible teachers to the General Conference heads, and it declared, quote, the effects of attempting to implement a test of commitment to Orthodox Adventism will be more divisive than whatever heretical tendencies may currently exist among church members. That is just wisdom.
Exactly. And,
when I heard, I think through your program, Peter, that they're still thinking about imposing, Ted Wilson or somebody up there was thinking of imposing a test to clean out people who, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Stop. It will never work.
Yeah.
And anyway, the statement of concern also called for a representative convocation, including church scholars, administrators, and eventually that inexorably led to Glacier View 1980, 15th to the 20th of August.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting.
Adventism.
Gillian has just joined us because she's had her power was off. So this is perfect timing, Gillian.
Welcome, Gillian. We're in your ballpark here.
Yeah.
So what I recognized and observed in my thesis was what I call sect rigidity at new intellectual flexibility. Robert Pearson's 1978 farewell speech was aimed at liberals who, quote him, not so subtly attack the spirit of prophecy. I appeal to Andrews University, to the seminary, to Loma Linda University. Don't let it happen. And then, of course, in 1980 came the release of a new statement of fundamental beliefs, which was based on the work of the esoterically named S13-E37 Church Manual Revision Fundamentalists Fundamental Beliefs Committee. And of course, your followers and your guests have variously commented on this. 1980 was Glacier View, also known as Consultation 1, and that exposed the loss of monologue, exposed pluralism, priests versus prophets, new intellectual challenge to charismatic orthodoxy led by Des Ford. I read 17 papers for my thesis from that Glacier View consultation. Fitzguy, Torkelson, Hackett, Veltman, Teal, Junior, Johnston, Raoul Dederen, Earl Amundsen, Jerry Gladson, Erwin Gaines, C.B. Rock, Niels Eric Andreessen, Walter Douglas, Jack Provencher, Ward Hill, Ron Graymill, and as well, of course, Des's 3 volumes of his presentation. Those papers I was able to get, going back to what I said at the start, thanks to Arthur Patrick and Eleanor Scale, who fed me that material. So the revisionist attitude came through, was a byproduct of their commitment to reassess the legitimacy of all Adventism's cultural symbols, especially investigative judgment, 1844, and an openness to extra-sectarian, that is non-Adventist methodologies, and 3, a readiness to accept revisionist consequences of their research. And Ford was at the very, bowsprit, at the very front of all this.
Yes.
I consulted 3 main sources, all editions of Spectrum in the years 70, 74 and 79, just to get a cross-section of what the new intellectuals had been saying and doing. I read publications by Ronald Numbers, as well as interview and publications by Des Ford, as well as interview. I interviewed him outside Camberwell Civic Centre in 1982. Just he and I felt like Nicodemus, He'd just given the presentation to a group of people that night, and I was very grateful I could spirit him away to a chair in the park in the Civic Centre there, where I could ask him some questions about stuff. Spectrum sample that I did over those 3 cross sections in 77, 49 unearthed many challenges to Ellen White. Is she a spirit, really? The spirit of prophecy? That's Richard Lewis. I don't know whether you've had him on. Questions about her literary dependence from Roy Branson and Harold Weitz. Her account of the French Revolution was questioned, of course, by William Peterson. Her use of Protestant historians in great controversy, Don McAdams. I don't know whether you questioned him about that.
No, he is reticent to come on the show.
I'm not going to put anyone in the poo, but that great controversy has got some terrible alt-right, right-wing stuff in it, which needs to be edited out by these revisionist historians.
Yeah,
they need to clean it out. I think
Ted won't let them.
No, She quotes Josiah Strong. Josiah
Really?
Strong. He's not a good guy.
Wow.
The history of American political right-wing history. Anyway, her revelations, were they interpretation or were they factual history? Is the train timetable accurate? This was the sort of question, you see. How come Islam, 20th century, American power, where are all these concerns? And of course, they're not in there. And the sample also shared, I was able to see a summary of the minutes of the 1919 Bible Conference, which when I interviewed Ronald Numbers in 1976, he was probably the first to authoritatively discredit Ellen White's authority as a health reformer. In that amazing book, Prophetess
Incredible book.
Amazing book.
Yeah.
I remember reading it and going, oh, well, there goes that.
Yes, me too. Yeah.
Historians can clearly disenchant the past, as I said on page 159, if I'm allowed to quote myself.
Yeah.
And the first cousin, I said he was the grandson of Roy Branson. He's the first cousin to Roy Branson. Ronald Numbers was a fourth-generation Adventist, co-founder of Adventist Association Forums, PhD in History of Science from University of California, Berkeley. In 1969, I was doing year 11, and he was employed at Andrews University until he moved on. Grady Smoot, I don't know whether you know about him.
I know about him, yeah.
He was the dean and later president of Andrews University. Over dinner, this is Ronald Numbers telling me in an interview. He said he knew about Ellen White's plagiarism. And he told Ronald Numbers, quote, and I'm quoting Ron here, may he rest in peace, don't ever tell anyone what I said to you. And if you do, I'll deny it. And he wasn't joking, Ron Numbers says. And you can hear that on the digitized pretty clearly, I think.
Yeah. Well, I've got to get a copy of that, Bob.
Yeah, well, I don't know how you find time to do what you do, Peter, but,
I don't sleep.
Eh?
I went to bed at 4:30 this morning.
Well, I'm not surprised. You see, I go to bed about 8 o'clock and wake up at 2. So I'm the opposite. He was shocked by Robert Pearson. You remember Robert Pearson?
Yes.
He was the General Conference president.
Yeah.
Of his quote, this is Ronald Numbers talking to me, attitude of virtually no respect for academic freedom.
Wow.
And he was, he wasn't at all upset at the departure of Earl Hilgard, Harold Weitz, Edward Vick. I've still got Edward Vick's book here, which I look at occasionally. Here it is, published by Pacific Press. Let me assure you, a wonderful book about the gospel and assurance, Well, I guess that's out of print now, but he was one of the greats who left. And Ron accordingly moved to Loma Linda, where he did research, and through discussions with friends, Harper and Row picked up and published his 1976 classic. And it goes back to the point you made earlier, Peter. That should have been published by our church, should have been published by our church to enlighten. And I'm reminded here that they have the same fear that Catholic church administrators have in respect to the things that they know about their own history and the history of Christianity. And the silence, the great wall of silence we meet in Christianity generally. So this, let me not damn the Washington people as if they're unique in this respect. Ronald Numbers' introduction to his book interestingly said, this book seeks neither to defend nor damn, but simply to understand. There, Peter, there's your...
Yeah,
that's what you were trying to tell me about your own understanding of your work is neither to defend nor damn, but simply to understand. And for me, the great thing that he showed, which was very clear, was that there was no angel standing and looking over his shoulder telling her what to write, but clearly her writings were produced by the cooperation of others. So what I call Adventism's postmodern moment. Have you got that slide up, Peter?
Yes, that's just popped up.
Okay. That postmodern moment, I've just, because I can and somebody else wants to argue with it, they're happy to. 1973 to 79. So those core years of the 70s.
Yeah.
Ford and Brinsmead colluding or separately, independently, cooperating or independently, responded to the perfectionist drift, the 60s drift of Adventism in the 70s, to the May 1974 Adventist Review special issue, the 1976 Palmdale Conference, the 1979 PUC AAF meeting, the fateful one, and of course Glacier View. And so Ford, I think, in himself represented Adventism's postmodern moment, what he said and what I believe to be true. There is always a question of how to interpret something. What does it mean? And then the third degree, is it true? Okay? How should we interpret anything? What does it meaning should it have for us? And are those meanings true? And I think this is true. So when I say I'm speaking at that deeper level, I think this is true. The grand narrative is over. There is no more master code. 1844 is a myth, a gloss, a narrative justification to be taken by faith, thereby distracting from the gospel itself. Ford did his best, but he basically, in those 3 volumes, points to the deconstructed prophetic basis of Adventism's reason for existence. It's us. And all he was trying to do was get the church to open the doors, open the books, open the inquiry. We could have had a royal commission into it, but no, we had this sort of Lynch, hangman, Glacier View session.
Yeah.
Cheap and nasty. You know, I concluded during my thesis that the monologue is over. There's diversity, struggle, and so forth. Of course, the pushback was handed over to the concerned brethren. The concerned brethren were an old knowledge class, using a sociological phrase, who identified Ford as the problem.
Yes.
And I didn't let rumour. I consulted the Standish twins, Colin and Russell, their publications, in particular, The Crisis in the Adventist Church and Adventism Vindicated. They used to come along to Brinsmead and Ford meetings and try to dismantle them, especially with interjections and question and answer time at the end.
Was that a recording that you did with them as well? In the
I can't find some of my recordings. I've moved too many times, Peter, and unfortunately, I would think they're in a box somewhere unmarked.
Right. I've got a few of those.
You know what happens to cassettes? The labels fall off, and then you go, I wonder what's on that.
What's
and that's how I found the Ron Numbers tape. I just put it in and went, oh, there's my Ron Numbers interview.
Yeah.
So I'm still going through.
Great stuff, because that's a valuable resource.
I've got hundreds to go through, Peter.
You could start your own podcast and just release and comment.
No, please.
Well, send them to me and I'll do a program on each one.
I'll have to. My wife will leave me if I do that.
Send them my way as you find them, and I'll do a show on each one as they come.
Well, I will send you what I digitize, and if you have a library resource to put them in, that's the best place, and people can access them. I'll be very happy for that.
Yeah.
But the Standish brothers and the old knowledge class, you know, there were many ministers who were imps, mischievous.
Mm.
But what they preferred was the theology of Milius Andreasen, as Brinsmead did during the 1930s and 40s. Milius Andreasen, who was labelled part of a lunatic fringe by the Questions on Doctrine scholars, and that is just a terrible thing, I think, to do to
because they weren't
people.
lunatic and they weren't a fringe.
Exactly. Exactly. That pejorative put down, I think that also scared me away from Adventist revisionist intellectuals at the time. You know, I thought, wow, how could you take that attitude?
Bad.
You know, and I still have letters from awakening agitators who were kicked out of the church, you know, and testimonies from Brinsmead himself about the treatment he and John got at the Hamilton, I think, Bible camp in New Zealand during the 60s. But there were some terrible things done in the name of the third angel's message. It's just ridiculous, you know.
Yes,
they
terrible.
preferred the traditional sanctuary doctrine.
Yeah,
they preferred Christian perfectionism as a component, a central component of the distinctive three angels message. They repudiated Reformationism, and Bob Brinsmead, who was championing it at the time, of course, and they repudiated liberal new intellectual revisionism of our history and our identity taking place through forums and Spectrum magazine and so forth. And they actively advocated purge and expulsion. Just think about that. It astounds me when I think about people who may be writing to the administrators now as we speak, or, you know, saying, oh, these some people here you've got to kick out of the church, you know. It frightens me.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Ford and Fordites were Mark II in the 80s of Brinsmead and Brinsmeadites in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
So, finally, Walter Ray, The White Lie, 1982, had some conclusions about Ellen White from his own research. And he'd begun that in the 70s. She was not original, multi-source material for her books, substantially influenced by others. As Adventism now concedes, she had help. She was not always in control of what went into or what came out of her writings. I'm just summarizing The White Lie here.
Yes.
She was not verbally inspired. We should question her methodology. And her methodology supposedly has brought rebuke and expulsion to people it shouldn't have. Earlier church leaders knew of her compromises and said nothing. Ellen White herself encouraged silence and duplicity.
Yes.
Strong stuff.
Very
Ray called his research, quote, downright frightening.
Yeah.
where Ford was merely disturbing.
Yeah.
And he said that his work sent administrators racing to computers with sweaty palms. He was a very, graphic.
A guerrilla fighter.
A guerrilla. Yeah, he said
I like what you said there.
Ford was a rebuilder, but he was, quote, a guerrilla fighter.
Yeah.
He was aiming for Adventism's jugular.
Yeah.
And he meant to, these are his words describing himself, by the way.
Yes, yeah.
He meant to tip the scales of authority of Ellen White and her writings.
Yeah, yeah.
So the tactics, the pushback, suppression, try and convert all these people who are going astray. Then again, we're going to have to accommodate some of the research that the intellectuals are doing. And Neil Wilson finally admitted during the early 80s that Ellen White used sources more extensively than we've heretofore been aware or recognized. I can only imagine somebody held a pen in his hand and made him sign off on these sentiments.
Mm.
I can't imagine them admitting to that happily or freely. Exclusion and expulsion followed. People defrocked, and you've had Harry Ballas, among
Yes.
others, talk about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I remember showing Walter Ray's book to a Fijian family friends of mine, and they got up and physically walked away.
Yeah.
They couldn't
Couldn't cope.
even look at it.
No.
Wow. Based on the negative influence of Elder Ray's conclusions circulated worldwide. So, as you know, suppression, attempted conversion, non-acknowledgement, accommodation, expulsion.
Yeah.
What I concluded was Adventism persists. This is my conclusions back in 20 years ago, 24 or so years ago. The sect persists, and descending splinters seem to be a recurring recidivist phenomena with only local intergenerational consequences. I thought the church would transmutate rather than go into decline, and I think they would say that that's what happened. They point to numbers and very happily say that the numbers are up, and if the numbers are up, we must be a success.
Yeah.
Secularization, I think, will just continue to hit Adventism and Christianity. Secularization, to quote one of the great sociologists of religion, Peter Berger, gravely threatens the traditional universe of meanings. That is to say, that explanations for reality are no longer exclusively located in God's will or the collective common sense, but also in the painful realities of specific social processes.
Wow.
Very powerful insight there from Peter Berger. May he rest in peace. The impact of modernization, or modernity, as we call it, post-modernity now, means discrepant worlds coexist in us all. It has become very difficult to maintain, or for that matter, to establish de novo any monopoly in the definition of reality. You know, will the real Ellen White stand up? Will the real Adventists stand up?
Yes.
Scholars outside of our circles are asking, will the real Jesus stand up?
Yeah.
The maintenance of any certitudes, particularly religious ones, you see where I'm reading, Peter?
Yes.
Is very difficult indeed. Pluralism has plunged religion into a crisis of credibility. In our current context constantly forces one God to rub shoulders with all other gods, eroding the individuality of each. In other words, when you put Ellen White up against all the rest of them, she becomes, quote, like any other book.
Yeah.
And finally, a quote here from Robert Lifton, Protean Man. The Protean Man was, remember, in mythology, pagan mythology, couldn't stabilize his identity. We are incapable of maintaining an unquestioning allegiance to the large ideologies and utopian thought of the 19th and early 20th century. We could have been talking about Adventism, not an Adventist. And starved for ideas and feelings that can give coherence to this world, to his world, though here too his taste is to new combinations. That's prophetic kind of writing. That's so insightful in his 1970 book, Protean Man. I don't know whether you've ever seen that.
No.
I'll leave it there, Peter, because I'm exhausted, and I'm sure your followers on Facebook are exhausted. And maybe tomorrow we can pick up the practical outcomes.
Good idea. Yeah.
That
that's
okay
a great
with you?
idea. Perfect. And look, again, I'll highlight that this has been what I call a goldmine of an interview, and one that I think, we'd all benefit watching several times over. Can you see me now? Can
I
you see me
can. I
now?
can see the
Oh,
two of us there, and
good.
that big white screen's gone. Thank you. We have to try and work out how to get
Yeah,
that
let's
working.
try it.
Don't we?
I'll do some research tonight and see
Okay,
if you
Peter.
can as well. There's simply a button on there. Like I've done this so many times, and I don't know what to do. But someone goes, "Oh, here it is." They press the button, and up it comes.
There probably is, but I'm even worse than you, mate. I have no idea on technology. My children have to come
and help out.
Yeah.
Those watching, and thank you for sticking with us. It's been a really great conversation. Coincidentally, as all of you know, every week on Wednesday, 6 p.m. California time, and Thursday, 11 a.m. New South Wales, Australia time, I am re-releasing an episode a week of season 2, the Glacier View Des Ford season, and it has been so well received, and we're going to keep that up tomorrow. And as I said, coincidentally, not planned, but my interview with Bob Wolfgramm is tomorrow, as in the replay. And so Bob's going to join us again tomorrow, same time as today, and we will watch the interview together with you guys, and then have a brief 5-minute break, and then a commentary on it, and just finish off today's analysis. Bob, the work you are referring to, was that part of your PhD? Is it available?
Master's thesis.
Right. So that
Master's.
thesis, is it? Did you
Yeah.
release it ever as a book people could
No,
access?
no.
Because a few
I
people have
was.
written to me and asked if they could somehow get a copy of it.
What I'll do is I'll send you the digital version of it. You put it somewhere in your archives, and because I have no location for it, I only have the print copy in my library shelf, obviously. But I thought at the time I was going to hurt people who had spoken to me.
Right.
You know, I had a great interview with Robert Parr. I wish I could find that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a hidden magical resource kind of vault there that we need to kind of make sure people it gets out there.
And also Lowell Tarling's archives. He's probably thrown them all out by now.
He sent me a bunch of books the other day. I've got a nice box of books. So thank you, Lowell, if you're watching. But he's probably got a whole lot more. I think he's going through.
He was a very big cassette recorder. He recorded interviews right through the 80s, end of the 70s.
I'll get on.
And I kind of followed behind him with my recorders. But it's only, I don't know how long I've got to live, Peter, but I'll find them, I hope, before I go.
And look, let's do a deal where don't worry, wait till you found them all. As you find them, send me the digital copy, and I'll immediately do a show the following week on it.
Okay.
And that way the material at least is getting out there into that's what hit me about season 2. Up until now, it's all only been available in the private Facebook group. And I'm like, hang on a second. That was a seminal season. We need to get it into the public. So it's only just now, 5 years later, going into the public realm.
Yes. Excellent.
We'll finish today with one question. Now, Mark Anthony, just confirm, are you on the show next week? If so, quickly email me and I'll send you the link before the episode. But Mark writes, and there have been a lot of great comments, but we'll leave them, unfortunately. He writes, why did Robert remain after knowing how Desmond was treated? I don't understand.
Good question. And I was of the view back then that I could probably stay and do some help change the temperature and that my sociological insights would help the church take the temperature out of the heat and the methodology that they were using, and I hoped that they would read my research and try and see, oh, well, I can see we have a very poor history of treating our heretics the way heretics have traditionally been treated in religions that we're critical of. So we didn't burn people literally at the stake, but we burned their income source. We forced them out of a stable, continuous, life career path that they should have had. And that's why I didn't. It's one of the many reasons. But I wasn't also as emotionally close to Des as I was to Bob.
Right.
And the reason I was closer to Bob was because my wife at the time was the daughter of Ray Martin, who was Bob's main boy in Victoria.
Yes, that's
hence
right.
he was a great resource to have. And eventually, when I said I want to meet him, this is in 1972, they said, of course you can meet him. He's coming down to Victoria. And so, I had the great fortune of meeting Bob in the early 70s when the gospel verdict was not on the horizon. It was still called Present Truth. But all those gospel present truths were, what a great library that was,
Yeah.
He was just taking Reformation literature and saying, here you go. And do you know, Peter, in those early 70s, we street preachers, I got them so enthused about the gospel that we were handing out Present Truth in Burke Street. Which is not, the church.
It's a shame.
Asking, what are you doing?
Because that's not. We don't sanction that.
And we don't even have any literature that knows the difference between imputed righteousness and imparted righteousness, all that. So,
so I know the awakening movement still exists to this day. Is there a plain truth verdict movement that exists?
You'll have to ask Bob that. If it does, it must be online. But I just treasure the historical archive that I've got.
That's why I really want to try and help get it out there, because I think there's some unheard material of yours that needs to get heard.
Yes. And I'm sorry that if I've spoken roughly about people, but I'm just going back and giving you what I researched and found at the time. So if you're
you've been great.
Thank you for allowing this to happen, Peter.
Oh, thanks, Bob. I feel like if you've watched the trajectory of our friendship, particularly from the interview we're going to watch tomorrow, it's gone from me trying to understand, me being confused, me totally not getting it, to the last interview finding some resolution, and then today going, I kind of I feel at peace, and I think that's a testament to the whole point of what we're trying to do. Is like you said earlier, you and Lowell have landed on a different page, but you're still good mates, and I yearn for that kind of concept where we can. And it's okay to be robust, and it's okay to criticize, and it's okay to kind of. Someone said that I was being sarcastic or something the other day, and I'm like, so what? I don't get what's your problem. We're humans. Well, look.
It was. I think it was Bruce Manners.
Oh yeah.
Who was a friend in the 80s, and I think if it wasn't him, maybe it was Bob Parr, it was somebody at Signs. I asked whether they were interested in publishing my master's thesis, and they just thought I was being totally on another planet there.
Well, I guess I guess they saw it as a real Too dangerous.
Too
Yeah.
way outside the pale. Yeah.
Way too dangerous.
Yes. So there's a time and place for everything.
Sad though.
Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, look, everyone, we will leave it there for today. And if you'd like to support what I am doing, now that I'm doing this other channel where it's so funny, like I'm producing, you know, at least 1 or 2 a week that are just these 20-minute episodes, but it takes me as much time to do that as to run the 3 shows a week. So I've suddenly doubled my work. So if anyone wants to throw a few dollars my way, there's the QR code. And also, if you go to PayPal, just look me up there, paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music, even though I'm not really doing music anymore. I'd appreciate a couple of dollars. That helps with the content. Well, until tomorrow, Bob, I'll say have a good afternoon and sleep well. And
thank you, my friend.
We'll see you
still
soon.
have a cassette. I still have a CD of your meditation music.
Oh,
Beautiful.
really? I wonder which one it is. Do you remember?
Gentle. Called Gentle something.
Gentle Moments.
Ah, there it is.
Oh, yeah, there you
There
go.
it is. Yes. I recently completed digitizing all my music.
Oh, yes.
CDs, cassettes, videos, tapes, vinyls. 35,000 tracks I've got, Peter, and you're in there.
I'm in there helping you sleep at night. See you later, Bob. See you tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
See you, everybody.